The glass door to my office wasn't even fully shut when I heard them laughing. I stood there frozen, my personal belongings stuffed hastily into a cardboard box, as the muffled sounds of celebration leaked through the sleek walls of the conference room I'd designed. The very room where, just 20 minutes earlier, my boss had coldly informed me that my services were no longer required. 10 years. 10 years of missed birthdays, of nights sleeping under my desk, of brilliant ideas that transformed a struggling startup into the darling of Silicon Valley. And now, I was being escorted out by security, like I was nothing. Like I was a threat. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were right to be afraid. I'm not going to pretend I saw it coming. That morning had started like any other Tuesday at Nexus Innovations. I'd grabbed my usual nitro cold brew from the artisanal coffee bar in our lobby, one of the perks I'd fought to include in our last office renovation. The barista, Miguel, had given me the same friendly nod he always did. "Working on anything exciting, Eliza?" he'd asked. I'd smiled, tired but proud. "Just putting the finishing touches on Meridian. Board presentation is this afternoon." Meridian was my baby. 2 years of development on an AI-driven platform that could revolutionize how businesses interact with consumer data while preserving privacy. It was elegant, ethically sound, and about to make Nexus billions. I'd named it after the invisible line that connects the Earth's poles, something unseen but fundamentally transformative. My team had been working around the clock for months. I'd personally written half the core algorithms, stayed up countless nights, untangling complex ethical knots in the programming. This wasn't just another product. This was my legacy. I breezed through the open concept office space, another one of my designs, meant to foster collaboration, nodding at my team members who looked equally exhausted but hopeful. They'd given everything to this project too. "Big day," said Raj, my most talented developer. "You ready?" "Born ready," I'd replied, setting my coffee down at my immaculately organized desk. An email notification pinged. A meeting request from Jeffrey Klein, our CEO, for 10:30 a.m. That was unusual. The board presentation wasn't until 2:00 p.m., and Jeffrey rarely scheduled anything without at least a day's notice. But I didn't think much of it. Probably last-minute prep for the board. If I'd been paying closer attention, maybe I would have noticed how Marcus, my direct supervisor and the company's chief innovation officer, avoided eye contact that morning. Or how Vanessa from HR was hovering near my department more than usual. But I was too focused on my final review of the Meridian presentation to see the vultures circling. At 10:28, I walked into Jeffrey's office, my tablet ready with a few slides in case he wanted a preview. His corner office offered a stunning view of San Francisco Bay, a daily reminder of the heights we'd climbed as a company. "Eliza, have a seat," he said, not looking up from his monitor. That's when I noticed Marcus was already there, sitting rigidly in one of the sleek chairs facing Jeffrey's desk, and Vanessa from HR, standing by the window, a folder clutched to her chest like a shield. My stomach dropped before anyone said a word. "We're making some structural changes?" Jeffrey began, finally meeting my eyes with a practiced, empty stare. "As we prepare to take Meridian to market, we've decided to move in a different direction with its leadership." The words hit me like individual bullets. "Different direction?" I echoed. "The board feels that Marcus has the right experience to lead Meridian through its commercial phase," Jeffrey continued, as if reading from an invisible script. "Your technical contributions have been valuable, but we need someone with stronger market intuition at the helm." I looked at Marcus, who had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, but not uncomfortable enough. "Marcus hasn't written a single line of code for Meridian," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. "He hasn't attended a single late-night debugging session. He didn't resolve the ethical dilemmas in the privacy architecture. That was me. That was my team." Jeffrey's expression hardened. "Meridian is a Nexus product, Eliza, not an Eliza Reeves product. All work done here belongs to the company." "I'm not disputing ownership," I said carefully. "I'm pointing out that Marcus doesn't understand Meridian's architecture well enough to lead it. I've been thoroughly briefed." Marcus finally spoke, his voice carrying that peculiar cadence of someone reciting something rehearsed. "And I've been working closely with Jeffrey and the board on the go-to-market strategy. Working closely with Jeffrey and the board. Behind my back. while I was pulling all-nighters perfecting the actual product. "So what exactly are you saying?" I asked, though I already knew. "We're terminating your position, effective immediately," Vanessa said, stepping forward with her folder of termination paperwork. "You'll receive 4 weeks severance, and we'll need you to sign these non-disclosure and non-compete agreements." My mind was spinning. Non-compete? You're firing me and then telling me I can't work in my field? "Standard procedure," Jeffrey said dismissively. "We're protecting our intellectual property." "My intellectual property?" I corrected before I could stop myself. Jeffrey's eyes flashed. "That attitude is exactly why we're making this change, Eliza. You've always acted like Nexus is your personal playground rather than a serious business." The injustice of it was staggering. I'd sacrificed everything for this company. My relationships, my health, years of my life. Now I was being discarded and villainized in the same breath. "The non-compete is negotiable," Marcus offered, as if throwing me a bone. "We could limit it to direct competitors only, for 18 months instead of 2 years. They'd planned this, calculated it. They needed me gone before the board presentation so that Marcus could present Meridian as his brainchild. Before I could make connections with the board members who would be flying in from around the world. Before I could claim any personal credit for what we all knew would be the company's most significant innovation in years. I should have screamed, should have thrown something, should have threatened legal action. Instead, I felt an eerie calm descend over me. A clarity I hadn't experienced in years of corporate politics and endless compromises. "I'll need time to review these documents with my attorney," I said, taking the folder from Vanessa but not opening it. "Of course," Jeffrey said, clearly relieved I wasn't making a scene. "Security will help you pack up your desk. We'll need your badge and company devices before you leave." And just like that, a decade of my life was over. My team watched in shocked silence as I packed my things under the watchful eye of Brian from security, a man whose children I'd bought Girl Scout cookies from just last month. Nobody spoke. They couldn't without risking their own positions. I understood. I didn't blame them. As I was escorted out, I caught a glimpse of the conference room where the executive team was already gathering. Through the glass, I saw Marcus standing at the head of the table. My presentation slides illuminated on the screen behind him. My slides, my work, my vision, and they were laughing. The first week, after being fired, was a blur of stunned disbelief. I barely left my apartment, a minimalist space I rarely saw during daylight hours when I worked at Nexus. Friends tried calling, but I let everything go to voicemail. What was there to say? That I'd devoted my life to a company that had discarded me like yesterday's technology? The severance agreement sat unopened on my kitchen counter. 4 weeks' pay for 10 years of innovation. And in exchange, all they wanted was my silence and my promise not to use my own expertise anywhere else. Such a bargain. It was during my second week of unemployment that the anger finally broke through the shock. I woke up at 3 a.m., drenched in sweat, fragments of a nightmare still clinging to my consciousness. In the dream, I'd been locked in a glass box, watching Marcus present my ideas to an applauding crowd while I screamed silently behind soundproof walls. I got up and made coffee, then opened my laptop for the first time since being escorted out of Nexus. The technology news sites were ablaze with headlines. Nexus unveils groundbreaking AI platform. Meridian. Marcus Wells, the genius behind Nexus's privacy. First AI revolution. Nexus stock soars 28% following Meridian announcement. There he was, Marcus Wells, beaming in professional photographs, standing exactly where I should have been. In one particularly nauseating interview, he spoke about the ethical breakthroughs in Meridian's architecture, the very problems I'd solved during weeks of sleepless nights while he attended networking events and golf tournaments. The privacy engine at Meridian's core represents a fundamental shift in how we approach consumer data, he was quoted saying, word for word from the presentation I'd prepared. I slammed my laptop shut and paced my apartment like a caged animal. This wasn't just corporate backstabbing. This was theft of my intellectual legacy. My life's most significant work was being paraded around with someone else's name on it. That's when I called Sophia. Sophia Rodriguez had been my roommate in grad school at MIT. While I'd taken the corporate path, She'd founded a modest tech consultancy that specialized in data ethics, a niche field that was suddenly becoming very relevant. We'd stayed in touch over the years, occasionally meeting for drinks when her work brought her to San Francisco. "They did what?" she exclaimed after I'd spilled the whole sordid story. We were sitting in a quiet corner of a cafe far from the Nexus offices, where I was unlikely to run into former colleagues. "Fired me, and handed my work to Marcus," I repeated, the words still bitter on my tongue. "And now they want me to sign away my right to work in my own field." Sophia's dark eyes narrowed. "Have you signed anything yet?" "No, I've been too." I gestured vaguely. "Traumatized? Betrayed? Ready to burn the whole place down?" she offered. I smiled weakly. "All of the above." Sophia leaned forward. "Don't sign anything. Not yet. They'll withhold my severance." 4 weeks' pay?" Sophia scoffed. "Eliza, what you know is worth infinitely more than that." She wasn't suggesting what I thought she was. She couldn't be. "I signed employment contracts," I reminded her. "Everything I developed at Nexus belongs to them, legally." Sophia took a sip of her espresso. "The specific implementation, yes, but not the concepts, not your expertise, not the problems you solved and how you solved them." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Sophia set down her cup precisely, "that Nexus isn't the only company that needs privacy-focused AI solutions. And you're the actual expert, not Marcus Wells." I shook my head. "They'd sue me into oblivion. Only if you directly replicate Meridian," Sophia countered. "But there are dozens of approaches to these problems. You've been so focused on one solution, their solution, that you haven't considered alternatives." For the first time since being fired, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. Possibility, perhaps. "Besides," Sophia continued, "my consultancy has been getting calls ever since Nexus announced Meridian. Everyone wants something similar. Nobody wants to be left behind. And you're telling me this because I need a partner who actually understands this technology," she said simply. "Someone who can build solutions from the ground up, not just talk about them at conferences. Someone exactly like you." The idea was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. Start over? Compete directly with Nexus? It seemed impossible. But then again, so had building Meridian in the first place. "I'd need time to think," I said. Sophia nodded. "Take all the time you need. But don't sign anything from Nexus until we talk again." I left that cafe with my mind racing for the first time in weeks, not with anger or betrayal, but with equations, architectures, and possibilities. That night, I dreamt of code instead of nightmares. The decision crystallized 3 days later when I saw the profile of Marcus Wells in the Wall Street Journal, complete with a photo shoot in the Nexus offices. He was leaning against my whiteboard, covered in my diagrams, smiling confidently as the visionary behind Meridian. I called Sophia that same afternoon. "I'm in," I said without preamble when she answered. "But we do this right. No shortcuts, no ethical compromises, and absolutely nothing that directly copies Meridian's proprietary code." "Wouldn't dream of it," Sophia replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "When can you start?" "I already have." The truth was, I'd spent the past 72 hours sketching out a new approach to the same problems Meridian addressed. Not a copy, but a reimagining. Where Meridian used a centralized privacy engine, my new concept employed a distributed architecture. Where Meridian prioritized speed, my approach emphasized customization. Different means to similar ends, but with distinct advantages that Meridian couldn't match. I named it Aurora. Sophia and I met the next day to hash out details. Her consultancy, EthiTech, would provide the initial funding and business infrastructure. I would lead the technical development. We'd be partners, equal owners of whatever we created. "We'll need a team," I said, spreading out my preliminary diagrams on her office table. "Who do you have in mind?" Sophia asked. I hesitated. Poaching from Nexus would be a declaration of war, and legally problematic given most of my former colleagues had the same non-compete clauses in their contracts. "Not from Nexus," I clarified. "But I know talented people at other companies who might be interested in something new, something meaningful." Sophia nodded. "I have some contacts too. People who've been following data ethics issues and are frustrated by corporate approaches. Within 2 weeks, we had assembled a small but formidable team. A privacy expert who'd recently left Google over ethical concerns, a brilliant programmer who'd worked on open-source AI projects, a UX designer with experience in making complex data interactions intuitive, and a business strategist who specialized in bringing technical innovations to market. We set up shop in a modest office space in Oakland, far from the gleaming towers of Nexus in downtown San Francisco. Our furniture was secondhand, our equipment basic but functional. It wasn't fancy, but it hummed with possibility. "Welcome to Aurora," I said on our first official day, standing before our small team. "We're here to build something that doesn't just match what's already out there. We're going to surpass it." I didn't mention Nexus or my history there. I didn't need to. Everyone in our industry had read about Meridian. Everyone knew who had really built it. Our first challenge was funding. While Sophia's consultancy provided enough to get started, developing Aurora would require significant capital. We needed investors who understood our vision and wouldn't push us to cut corners for quick profits, the very pressure that had led to my downfall at Nexus. "We could try venture capital," Sophia suggested, as we reviewed our financials one evening. I shook my head. "VCs will want too much control. They'll push for a quick exit. That's not what we're building." "Then what's the alternative?" I smiled. "I have an idea." The next day, I reached out to Catherine Villiers, a board member at Nexus who had always seemed to appreciate my work. She had voted against my termination, I'd learned through the grapevine, but had been outnumbered. More importantly, she was also a partner at Helix Ventures, a firm known for its long-term approach to technological innovation. "Eliza," she said when we met for coffee, "I was wondering when I'd hear from you." "I'm assuming you've signed NDAs with Nexus," I began, "so I won't ask you to divulge anything. But I wanted you to know that I've started something new." Catherine studied me carefully. "Something competitive with Meridian?" "Something better than Meridian," I clarified. "Built from the ground up with different architecture and priorities. And you're telling me this because Helix Ventures invests in paradigm-shifting technologies, and that's exactly what we're building." Catherine leaned back, a small smile playing at her lips. "You know that my position at Nexus creates a potential conflict." "I do," I acknowledged. "But I also know that your fiduciary duty is to identify the best opportunities for Helix, regardless of your other board seats." She laughed then, a genuine laugh of appreciation. "You always were direct, Eliza. It's what I liked about you." "I'm not asking you to make any decisions today," I continued. "Just to look at what we're building. If you don't see its potential, no hard feelings." 2 days later, Catherine visited our Oakland office. She watched in silence as I demonstrated our early prototype of Aurora, still rough around the edges, but already showing the power of our distributed privacy architecture. "The difference," I explained as I walked her through the system, "is that with Aurora, users truly own their data. Companies can analyze aggregate insights without ever accessing individual information. It's privacy by design, not privacy by policy." When the demonstration ended, Catherine asked questions for nearly an hour. Technical, probing, insightful questions that showed she understood exactly what we were trying to accomplish. "Nexus will come after you," she said finally. "You know that." "For what?" I countered. "Aurora doesn't use a single line of Meridian's code. The architecture is completely different. The approach is novel. They'll claim you violated your non-compete." I smiled. "The non-compete I never signed?" Catherine's eyebrows rose. "You didn't sign the termination paperwork?" "I was advised to have my lawyer review it first," I said innocently. "He's been very thorough. We're still in the review process." It was a legal gray area, and we both knew it. But Catherine was no stranger to calculated risks. "I'll need to review this with my partners," she said, gathering her things. "But unofficially, Eliza, I'm impressed." 3 days later, Helix Ventures offered us $5 million in seed funding, with one condition. I had to resolve my legal situation with Nexus cleanly, one way or another. It was time to face my former employers. "Ms. Reeves," Jeffrey Klein said coldly as I was shown into his office, "I was beginning to think you dropped off the face of the earth." "Just been busy," I replied, taking a seat across from him without waiting for an invitation. New projects, new opportunities. His eyes narrowed. Our legal department tells me you never returned your signed termination agreements. I had some concerns about the terms, I said mildly. Particularly the non-compete clauses. Those are standard in our industry. For employees who are terminated with cause, perhaps, I countered. But I was let go due to structural changes, if I recall correctly, not performance issues. Jeffrey leaned forward. What exactly are you asking for, Eliza? A mutual release, I said simply. You acknowledge that my departure was not due to any failing on my part, and I agree not to disparage Nexus publicly. You remove the non-compete requirements, and I agree not to directly copy Nexus's proprietary technology. That's completely unacceptable. I shrugged. Then I suppose we'll let the courts decide whether your termination process was legally sound. I'm sure the tech press would love to cover that story. The threat hung in the air between us. We both knew what a legal battle would mean. Not just the expense, but the publicity. Questions would be raised about who really created Meridian. Investors might get nervous. What are you really after? Jeffrey asked, his voice quieter now. Freedom to work in my field, I replied honestly. That's all. I'm not looking to damage Nexus. I just want to move forward with my career. You're starting a competing company, he stated flatly. It wasn't a question. I'm exploring several opportunities, I said carefully, none of which involve replicating Meridian's proprietary code or architecture. Jeffrey studied me for a long moment. I'll have legal draft a more limited agreement. No complete release, but a narrowed non-compete that specifies you can't create direct competition to Meridian specifically. It wasn't perfect, but it was workable. Aurora was different enough from Meridian that we could navigate those restrictions. I'll review it with my attorney, I said, standing to leave. As I reached the door, Jeffrey spoke again. If you go after our clients, Eliza, we'll come after you with everything we have. I turned back to face him. I'm not going after anyone, Jeffrey. I'm simply building something better. The modified agreement arrived the next day. After careful review with our lawyers, I signed it. The path was clear. The next 6 months were the most intense of my professional life. Our team grew to 15 people, all working with a passion I'd never seen at Nexus, even in the early days. We weren't just building technology. We were on a mission to redefine how data privacy and AI could coexist. Aurora took shape with remarkable speed. Where Meridian offered companies a powerful but ultimately conventional approach to data analytics, Aurora provided something revolutionary. A platform where consumers could participate in the value of their data while maintaining absolute control over their privacy. The technical challenges were enormous. Building a distributed architecture that could deliver competitive performance required solving problems that the Meridian team hadn't even considered. There were moments when I doubted whether we could pull it off. Nights when I stared at seemingly unsolvable equations until my vision blurred. But we had something Nexus didn't. A team with nothing to lose and everything to prove. We need to start thinking about our market entry, Sophia said one evening as we reviewed our progress. Meridian has a 6-month head start on us. They also have a fundamental weakness, I pointed out. They're selling to corporations, not consumers. The companies buy the technology, but the people whose data is being analyzed have no say in the matter. Sophia caught my meaning immediately. So we go direct to consumers first. Exactly. We build a community of users who value privacy, but understand the importance of data in modern business. We give them tools to control and benefit from their own information. And then companies have to come to us, because that's where the data is, Sophia finished, eyes bright with excitement. Our strategy crystallized. Aurora would launch as a consumer platform first, a free service that would give people unprecedented control over their digital footprint. Once we had a critical mass of users, businesses would follow, not because they particularly cared about privacy, but because they needed access to consumer insights. It was the inverse of Nexus's approach, and it addressed a growing concern that Meridian conveniently ignored. People were becoming increasingly uncomfortable with how their data was being harvested and used. As our launch date approached, we began to see the first signs that all wasn't well in Meridian land. Tech forums were buzzing with complaints about its implementation challenges. Companies were struggling to integrate it with their existing systems. And most critically, consumer advocacy groups were raising alarms about some of Meridian's more aggressive data collection methods. They rushed it to market, I told our team during a strategy session. They had the architecture I designed, but they didn't have the understanding of why certain choices were made. They're making changes without seeing the ripple effects. It was a classic case of knowing what, but not why. The very reason I had argued against putting Marcus in charge of Meridian's development. Our opportunity was emerging faster than we had anticipated. 2 weeks before our scheduled launch, I received an unexpected message from Raj, my former team member at Nexus. "Can we meet?" was all it said. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe in Berkeley, far from both our offices. Raj looked tired when he arrived, with new lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when I left Nexus. "How are you holding up?" I asked after we'd exchanged awkward greetings. "It's been challenging," he admitted. "Things changed after you left. The collaborative culture you built, it's gone." I waited, sensing there was more. "Marcus doesn't understand the system," Raj continued, lowering his voice. "He's making demands that compromise the architecture's integrity. When we push back, he threatens to replace us." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully, unsure where this was headed. Raj leaned forward. "There's a problem with Meridian, a serious one. The privacy engine has a fundamental flaw that could expose sensitive user data under certain conditions." My blood ran cold. "Have you reported it?" "To Marcus?" "Yes. He said the probability of those conditions occurring was too low to delay deployment, that the market window was too important." "That's insane," I whispered. "If there's a vulnerability—" "It's worse than a vulnerability," Raj interrupted. "It's a design compromise made after you left. They modified your original privacy engine to improve processing speed. The implications were staggering. Millions of people's data was potentially at risk because Marcus had prioritized performance metrics over security." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, though I already knew. "Because you're launching something new," Raj said simply. "And I need to know if you're building it right. If you're maintaining the ethical standards you always insisted on at Nexus." "We are," I assured him. "Aurora's entire design puts privacy first. It's our fundamental differentiation." Raj nodded slowly. "That's what I hoped." He paused, then added, "A lot of us at Nexus are watching what you're doing, Eliza, more than you might think." "Are you asking for a job?" I asked gently. He smiled sadly. "Not yet. I have some unfinished business at Nexus first. Some things I need to fix before I can leave in good conscience." We parted with a promise to stay in touch. As I watched Raj walk away, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: concern for my former team, anger at Marcus's recklessness, and a renewed determination to make Aurora everything Meridian should have been. The next day, I called an emergency meeting with our team and our lawyers. "We need to accelerate our launch," I announced. "And we need to be absolutely certain our privacy protections are bulletproof." Aurora launched on a Tuesday morning with little fanfare. A simple announcement on tech forums, a modest press release, and an elegant website explaining our vision of privacy-first intelligence. We had decided against a big, splashy event like Nexus had done for Meridian. We wanted Aurora to spread organically, based on its merits rather than marketing hype. For the first few hours, traffic to our site was modest. By lunchtime, it had tripled. By evening, our servers were struggling to keep up with the demand. What had happened? The answer came in the form of a TechCrunch headline: "Meridian security flaw exposes user data, Nexus scrambling for fix." Someone at Nexus, I strongly suspected Raj, had blown the whistle on Meridian's privacy vulnerabilities. The article detailed exactly what he had told me: critical security compromises made to boost performance metrics, pushed through despite internal objections. The timing couldn't have been more perfect for Aurora if we had planned it ourselves. As companies and consumers frantically searched for alternatives to Meridian, they found us, a platform built from the ground up with privacy as its cornerstone. By the end of our first week, we had over 1 million consumer signups. By the end of the month, Our user base had grown to 5 million, and we were fielding calls from major corporations desperate for a secure alternative to Meridian. Nexus's stock plummeted 22% in a single day. Marcus Wells was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. Jeffrey Klein issued a public statement promising that Nexus would redouble our commitment to user privacy. But the damage was done. Trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to fully restore, especially when it comes to sensitive data. I received another message from Raj the week after the news broke. Doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always right. He didn't need to say more. I understood. 3 weeks later, he joined Aurora as our head of security architecture. He wasn't the only one. Over the next few months, 7 key members of my former Nexus team made the jump to Aurora, each bringing valuable expertise and a shared commitment to our vision. 6 months after our launch, Aurora's valuation exceeded 1 billion unicorn status in record time. Our distributed privacy architecture was being hailed as the new industry standard. Companies were redesigning their data strategies around our platform. And Nexus? They eventually patched Meridian's security flaws, but the solution was cumbersome, a band-aid on a fundamentally compromised design. Their market share continued to erode as Aurora's grew. I took no pleasure in their struggles. Well, perhaps a little, but my focus was on building Aurora into everything I knew it could be, not on watching Nexus falter. The invitation arrived exactly 1 year after I'd been fired from Nexus, an irony that wasn't lost on me. The World Economic Forum wanted me to deliver a keynote address on the future of ethical AI at their upcoming technology summit. As I stood at the podium looking out at the audience of industry leaders, policymakers, and media, I spotted Jeffrey Klein sitting in the third row. Our eyes met briefly. He gave a small, resigned nod. The greatest challenge of our digital age, I began, isn't technological. We know how to build powerful systems, how to analyze vast oceans of data, how to derive insights that were unimaginable a generation ago. No, our greatest challenge is ethical. How do we harness these capabilities while respecting fundamental human rights to privacy and autonomy? The room was silent, attentive. At Aurora, we believe the answer begins with a simple premise. People should own their own data. They should control how it's used, who can access it, and what value they receive in exchange for sharing it. This isn't just the right thing to do, it's also good business. I went on to outline Aurora's vision, our distributed architecture, and the principles that guided our development. I didn't mention Nexus or Meridian once. I didn't need to. Everyone in that room knew the story. As I concluded my speech to enthusiastic applause, I felt a sense of closure. The journey from that glass-walled conference room where I'd been fired to this global stage had been arduous and uncertain. But standing there, I knew with absolute clarity that being forced out of Nexus had been the best thing that ever happened to me. After the talk, as I was gathering my notes, Jeffrey approached. "Impressive presentation," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "You've built something significant." "Thank you," I replied simply. "I suppose I should thank you," he continued after an awkward pause. "Meridian's failures forced us to reevaluate our entire approach to innovation." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that an apology, Jeffrey?" "Let's call it a recognition," he offered with the ghost of a smile. "You were right about Marcus, about a lot of things." "Water under the bridge," I said, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. "We're launching a completely redesigned version of Meridian next quarter," he said, "built around many of the same principles you outlined today." "Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery," I observed. "Competition drives innovation," he countered. "You taught us that, perhaps not in the way anyone expected." As we parted ways, I felt no animosity toward Jeffrey or even Marcus. They had acted according to their nature, prioritizing short-term gains over integrity. In doing so, they had inadvertently set me free to build something far greater than what would have been possible within Nexus's constraints. Later that evening, at a small celebration with the Aurora team, Sophia raised a toast. "To Eliza," she said, "who turned betrayal into breakthrough." I smiled and added, "And to building things that matter, the right way." As I looked around at the faces of my team, People who had joined Aurora not just for a paycheck, but for a purpose. I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Being fired had seemed like the end of everything. Instead, it had been the beginning of something far more meaningful than I could have imagined. They had taken my job and claimed credit for my work. In response, I hadn't just become their competitor. I had redefined the entire playing field. Sometimes, justice doesn't come from winning the game. It comes from changing it entirely.